Georgian and sorry, not even Elizabethan, that was wrong. Hi all, welcome to my first academic vlog for the London Study Abroad program. I'm in this class called Period Styles, and it is an independent study course in which you go through the basically 9 periods of British history and do some research on each relating to kind of theater aesthetic and style within those periods. And you will be seeing eventually 8 videos like this one covering prehistory, the Roman invasion, kind of Dark and Middle Ages, the Tudor era, Reformation, Restoration, Georgian, Victorian / Edwardian, and Windsor, which is the period that we're technically in right now. So this is the first one. This is prehistory. What you're going to see is a series of photos that I took on my adventures looking for prehistorical stuff this week, and I'm going to kind of narrate what I saw, why I think it's significant, and kind of what called me to it. My central area of focus for this class is kind of the aesthetic of women. To elaborate on that further, kind of in each period, how women were being depicted, kind of generally speaking, what their figures looked like, what was sort of sexualized about them and what was not, what was desirable, what made kind of a good woman. And that is, of course, dramatically changed over time. And so we're going to start with prehistory. I'm going to jump in, and I hope you enjoy what I found. In order to get myself oriented, I went with the rest of my class to the Museum of London. Though this museum covers everything from antiquity to the present day, I really focused on the prehistoric rooms because I wanted to kind of figure out what struck my fancy, especially regarding my focus. To the surprise of no one, I started out being excited about skulls, primarily the skulls of like ancient cows, basically, especially the aurochs, who really surprised me. Like, how did he walk with those giant horns? I don't understand it. It's really kind of mind-blowing to me. As I worked my way around the room, I was looking for things that I could kind of compare to get a sense of the development of art in prehistory. And of course, this was really challenging. There's not that much out there that is that old. But 2 things really caught my eye, and I decided to kind of do a almost portraiture style analysis of these 2 slightly unrelated objects that I think actually have quite a great deal in common. The first object in question is called the Dagenham statue, which was found in Dagenham, which is a kind of a borough of London, actually out to the east. And it is particularly striking not only because of how incredibly old it is, but also because of its figure. Now you can see in this photo here that there's kind of a hole where anatomically the genitals would be, and it's thought that this is to represent kind of a androgynous godlike being, which I found was really interesting, that this statue, almost doll, kind of is neither male nor female, but is clearly humanoid. The second was a recreation based on the skull of a prehistoric woman, and she's called the Shepperton woman because of where her remains were found. It's pretty exciting because her skull was almost all the way intact, which meant that they could recreate basically what they thought her facial structure looked like. And fascinatingly enough, here we find another kind of androgynous figure. You see she's got really strong cheekbones, a really kind of flat, broad nose, and doesn't look, quite like the humans that we know and recognize today. And this is really exciting for a couple of reasons. The first being that, beauty develops, right? And the second being that evolution happens, that these people do not quite look like us, and therefore humanity has changed over time. I enjoyed comparing these 2 because one is neither male nor female, and the other is female presenting almost male, and I found them equally beautiful and equally fascinating, and I think that it was really indicative of how our perception of gender and sexuality has actually changed over time. Not to mention, it's interesting to see evidence of kind of females in prehistory, just to kind of see where we're starting from, basically. But enough with the Museum of London, let's move on to the British Museum. This was my counterpart for the Museum of London to further expand upon my prehistoric studies, and I found something really, really exciting to me. So the British Museum is huge, but my highlight for the prehistoric era was definitely this itsy bitsy statue you can see here, and you might think it looks a little bit odd, and that's because it does. It's the first kind of extant statue of a love-making couple, and that's not what you see, I think, when you first look at it, but as you circle around the statue, you can see these two entwined figures who are sort of phallic in nature, and that their silhouette changes as you rotate around this figure, and that's a really, really complex design. It looks slightly different from every angle. And if you want to get a closer look at that, you can pause the video right here and take a closer look at the more clear illustration of what they're intended to look like. The British Museum was really great. I wish I had spent more time there, but I had bigger fish to fry. The other huge highlight from our prehistoric studies actually came quite a bit later in the program than those first photos, and that was our class trip to Stonehenge and Avebury on our way to Bath, which you will see more of in future videos. And I had an absolute blast running around these ancient rocks and figuring out why they rock. I'm sorry, I'm gonna go now. Welcome to Stonehenge. This place has a really interesting visitor center that I did not pay attention to because, let's be real, I wanted to see the rocks. And they're much smaller than you would anticipate. I think it's much less breathtaking and godly than I think pictures would have you believe. It's really quite small. It's just sort of sitting out here in the middle of the British countryside, not bothering anyone. And all of a sudden you come up this hill and there are cars and people and this little tiny rock castle that has been around for longer than people can quantify and no one quite understands the purpose of. It was really interesting to walk around and almost feel these echoes of the past. I thought it was actually quite reminiscent of a stage, and some people think that maybe it was used as a ritual and meeting ground, and it reminded me a lot of how we do theater in the round now, and so I was particularly excited to see it. We then took a quick stop in Avebury, which is quite similar to Stonehenge in that it is a city surrounded by a ditch and lined completely with a circle of ancient stones, just like at Stonehenge. I think the highlight for me, though, was probably the sheep. There are sheep everywhere in this town. I mean, look at these little guys. So maybe I got a bit distracted by this and the fairy tree where people tie ribbons, I believe, to make wishes. It was a really beautiful, striking thing. And the city itself was, well, not a city. It's this tiny little town surrounded by rocks, but they're proud of their heritage. And it was interesting to see people cohabitate among this ancient ritual space. So, ladies and gentlemen, there you have the prehistoric period in which I got really jazzed about cows and sheep, compared the aesthetic kind of these two depictions of humanity in the prehistoric era, and thought a little bit about whether or not Stonehenge was a theater long, long ago. I think it'd be interesting to build a set kind of like that now, where you had to like wander around, because Stonehenge looks different from every angle. Like, how interesting would it be to have an audience kind of sit around the outside of a structure like Stonehenge and looking in and peering through at the action happening within. I think that is something worth pursuing. Who knows? In the meantime, I'm looking forward to Rome. I hope you are too. And thank you for listening. Live your best lives and be good.